Shalom, I'm Rabbi Michael Panitz. I'm the Rabbi of Temple Israel of Norfolk, Virginia, and I have the honor to be speaking to you from the pulpit of our congregation. At this time, I'd like to address the subject, Justice is blind, but bribery blinds judges. Again, justice is blind, but bribery blinds judges. If you were giving a pep talk to a group about to settle in a new land, and you wanted to keep them focused on achieving long-term success, what would you emphasize? In the American case, at the start of the English colonization of the Atlantic seaboard, John Winthrop emphasized that the pioneers needed to see themselves as new Israelites, and they needed to behave accordingly. Winthrop preached his sermon entitled A Model of Christian Charity before the congregation of men and women preparing to sail the ocean and establish the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1630. Echoing the language of Moses in Deuteronomy, Winthrop told them that they needed to fulfill their covenant with God. If they did so, they would become like a, quote, shining city on a hill, and cause the entire world to ask for God's blessings in a way that redounded to the credit of New England, because God would surely reward the New Englanders with political and personal successes. Contrariwise, if the pioneers failed to keep that covenant, God would punish them before the eyes of all humanity, and in their failure, the New England Puritans would become the byword for shame throughout the world. As a devout Puritan, Winthrop certainly knew his Bible, and his citation of the book of Deuteronomy is broadly in keeping with the intent of the authors of Deuteronomy, namely, to motivate the Israelites to set up a society in which people were true to their covenant with God. But it is telling that in his citation of the words of Moses, Winthrop underemphasized one of the key points of Moses' valedictory address. Winthrop called for justice as one virtue among several, along with mercy, humility, self-sacrifice for the sake of others in the group, and obedience to the many provisions of God's revealed commandments. But Moses himself, in the speeches presented by the authors of Deuteronomy, went to rhetorical lengths to highlight justice as a core value worthy of special emphasis. While in these speeches Moses called for obedience to the entire covenant in general, there is a special added emphasis in Moses' description of justice and the obstacles that prevent its fair realization. Quote, "Judges and overseers you shall set for yourselves within all your gates, and they shall judge the people with just judgment. You shall not skew judgment. You shall recognize no face, and no bribe shall you take, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and perverts the words of the innocent. Justice, justice shall you pursue, so that you may live and take hold of the land that the Lord your God is about to give you." Famous words from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 16, verses 18 through 20. Tzedek, tzedek tirdof. In the Hebrew, justice, justice shall you pursue. Notice 2 points about this remarkable quotation. First, Moses tells us to pursue justice, not simply to do it or fulfill the commandments enjoining it. And second, Moses speaks expansively, detailing the damage done by bribery to the proper administration of justice. Let us explore these points in turn. Deuteronomy is all about fulfilling God's mandates. The verbs found in the book include la'asot, to do, lishmor, to keep or guard, lekayem, to fulfill. The speeches also highlight the commandment, somewhat alien to the modern temperament, to love God. Today we do not think of love as being the object of command, but manifestly the author of Deuteronomy did not think the way we do. Behaviorally, the rhetoric of Moses also spoke of devekut, clinging to God. But nowhere else in the book does Moses enjoin us to pursue a commandment. What is suggested by this unique employment of the word tirdof, shall you pursue? In the classical era of commentary on the Bible, the rabbis parsed the word tirdof to mean go the extra mile, literally. Relocate, if necessary, to live in an area where the judge was worthy. Later, Bible commentators brought out other nuances of the word. Rabbi Moses ben Nachmanides, explicated the phrase in the manner of the Jewish mystical tradition, that the first justice, remember it's repeated, justice, that the first justice tells one about justice in this world, and the second justice is more utopian, telling us to pursue those ideals that we commonly consign to Olam Haba, a perfected future world. It follows that in his reading, Tirdof, you shall pursue, suggests that such a pursuit is necessary if we are to break through the boundaries of convention that prevent us from achieving the utopia that God wishes us to inhabit. Let us broaden our field of lexical inquiry and see what other value concept in the Bible besides justice is presented along with the verb, you shall pursue. I can think of only one. Psalm 34, asking the question, Mi ha'ish hechafetz chayim, who is the man who is the lover of life? Answers that question, Bakesh shalom verodfehu, seeking peace and pursuing it. I believe that this quotation, seek peace and pursue it, allows us to plumb the depths of the rationale for the unique word choice, tirdof, you shall pursue. It is enough to fulfill most of the commandments. The specifics are given to us, and we need to align our behavior in line with the mandates presented by our tradition. But in two cases, the attainment of peace and the realization of justice, we have to go after those values in order to bring them about. Peace and justice are not like the Sabbath and the dietary code. We do not achieve peace and justice simply by checking off the behavioral boxes. Being a peacemaker or a justice maker means an entire approach to life, one that ultimately goes beyond the passive fulfillment of already expressed commandments. To pursue peace and to pursue justice means to make real that which can never quite be reduced to a codified formula. As for the second feature of the words of Moses, the rhetorical description of the damage done by bribery, we should notice that his words are poetic, not literal. Blinding the eyes of the wise is a figure of speech here. Again, we can find a parallel in the poetry of the Psalms that will help us tease out a nuance of the meaning of the phrase here in Deuteronomy. Extolling the value of God's instruction, the psalmist says, Torat Adonai Temima Meshivat Nafesh, the Lord's teaching is perfect, restoring to life, the Lord's command unblemished, giving light to the eyes. Psalm 19, verses 8 and 9. Blinding is the opposite. Bribery deadens and dulls our moral faculty, leaving us incapable of contributing to a society in keeping with the idealistic goals of God's covenant. Now, this is unfortunately especially timely today, with new urgency concerning questions of gifts offered to and accepted by Supreme Court justices. In the wake of revelations first reported on April 6th of this year, that Associate Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas accepted repeated lavish gifts from Harlan Rogers Crow, a real estate developer active in Republican Party and conservative causes, and that Crow also donated significant funds to an advocacy group founded by Thomas's wife, Virginia Thomas. In the wake of those revelations, there have been calls for a tighter regulation of judicial disclosure of these kinds of gifts. Two independent watchdog organizations, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington and Project on Government Oversight, have called for action against Justice Thomas based on the enforcement mechanisms of the Code of Conduct for United States judges. In truth, it is not likely that this will result in any decisive action, but the odor of partiality, made more pungent by the pugnacious responses of Justices Thomas and also Samuel Alito to calls for stricter ethics regulation, is surely one of the factors involved in the historically low public confidence in the Supreme Court. Only 1 in 4 of Americans polled, down from the already low 1 in 3 in a poll taken 2 years ago. The vision of Moses regarding an upstanding judiciary has another dimension that speaks to our era. In the biblical vision, such a judiciary being upstanding, it can stand up to an overweening executive, as the prophet Nathan did in standing up to King David. This dimension is relevant to us both as Americans and as concerned supporters of Israel. I hope to address this topic during a sermon next month at our high holiday worship. For the moment, let us keep the following in mind. Our Jewish experience of God involves the triumph of liberty over tyranny, the stability of law-abiding society over the violence bred of anarchy, and the ultimate goal of justice rather than the endless cynical struggle for power. That is how we Jews internalize the American phrase, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. There are always forces that reject the messiness of vigorous democracy and prefer to pay the price of living under autocracy. Sometimes the rationale is efficiency. Mussolini famously made Italian trains run on time. Sometimes the rationale is a bulwark against some fanatical assault upon society from another quarter. Many Germans voted for Hitler in 1932 to stop the communists. But the basic insight of Judaism, confirmed by the sad and sanguine truth of Jewish history, is that only God is perfect. And therefore, people need a check and balance upon the tendencies of the powerful to grind all others into the dust. This is true in democratic society no less than it was in the days of monarchy. Law is the language of the Hebrew Bible because God's covenant was the bulwark against the greed and cynicism of the king. In our post-biblical world, that basic insight still holds. An independent judiciary today, free to challenge tyranny, but committed to ethical self-control, is in line with the Jewish vision of how, even in a secular era, to be a shining city on a hill. In such a society, the dream of tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice shall you pursue, would be a dream come true.